We're going to move on to our next story, which involves Khanna, and it also involves Chris Hedges. They're separate clips, but I just want to prove a point. Khanna was interviewed recently on CNN about Bidenomics, Joe Biden's economy, and how they're going to be able to turn this around and get more voters, I guess, excited about voting for Joe Biden in reference to the economy. Khanna is sitting here telling blatant lies about the economy. We're going to go through his interview first, and then I want to show you a contrast. I want to show you the interview that Chris Hedges had with Richard Wolff about the economy, and I want you to decide who you think is telling the truth about what's happening right now with the economy. Shout out to Case Study QB. I said QD. Shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. Let's go ahead and dive right in. As you can see here, it says poll, 69% of Republicans don't believe, the whole Biden thing. We skipped over that part because YouTube is funny about when you talk about the 2020 election and what Trump believes. Even though they said that you can talk about that now, I still don't trust it. So I still don't talk about it. But we're getting into this part here about the economy, and I want you to listen to what Khanna says.
Another part of this poll that is important to talk about is Joe Biden's approval rating. Overall, his approval rating is sitting at 41%. That is not great. His approval on handling the economy is even lower than his overall approval rating. Handling of the economy is sitting at 37%, Congressman. And this is where the numbers...
Let's pause here for a second. So, in reference to Joe Biden's handling of the economy, 37% approve. 37%. 63% disapprove. Now, Khanna is going to go on to tell you what he feels about the economy, as if those 63% of Americans are liars. Listen to this. And I have to admit, I was surprised to see this with CNN because, they're pro-Democrat. But although they have had some changes they're trying to be more middle of the road or whatever it's supposed to be. But I felt like she was a little bit stern with Khanna in reference to the economy. Listen to this.
Congressman, and this is where the number sits when you've got a series of good reports coming in about the economy. If that's where it sits when you're getting good news on the economy, how do you make a case that Joe Biden is doing okay?
Well, we have to talk about what the president has achieved and what he will achieve. He inherited a tough situation. He came in towards the end of COVID, and that was an economy that was hurting because of unemployment. We had to have spending to bring the unemployment rate down.
So I want to go ahead and say two things really quickly here. I don't think any of us are disputing the fact that when Joe Biden became president, the economy was not great at that point in time. I don't think any of us are disputing that. We all realize that we were going through the pandemic. We totally get all of that. Problem is, as time went on, Joe Biden's policies, his economic policies, actually made things worse. The escalation of the war between Russia and Ukraine actually made things worse economically for all of us, not just Russia, which is what they believed would happen. Okay, so there's that issue. The second issue, he brings up the unemployment. He said we had to, spend to bring the unemployment numbers down. The unemployment numbers originally went down because Joe Biden removed people from unemployment. And Khanna talks about this as though this never happened. And they're all doing it. They're all doing it. Pramila Jayapal, AOC, they all have the same talking points when they come onto CNN and MSNBC in reference to the economy. None of them mention the fact that in September that year, Joe Biden removed all those people off of unemployment. So, of course, if you're removing millions of people off of unemployment, of course, the unemployment rate is going to decrease significantly. But none of them will say that. None of them will say it. And Ro Khanna leaves that out as well. So let's continue. Let's go back a little bit. Sorry.
To bring the unemployment rate down, and that hurt with inflation. So he inherited a tough situation. But what did he do? We've got construction going on around this country because of the infrastructure bill.
That doesn't put money in people's pockets. The infrastructure bill that passed, that's not changing, people's bank accounts right now. And I'm just keep it real. If you have 2 jobs, if you're working like at Dunkin' Donuts and you're also working like as a tutor, or these common things here in Massachusetts, or you're working as like, let's say a part-time like plumber or something like that, and you're also working as like you're babysitting or something like that. I mean, though that infrastructure bill is not putting money into your pocket. He's talking about things that have been done where he is like, we helped the infrastructure in this country. And he leaves out other things that were a part of that bill that also help people like Joe Manchin continue to get his fortune increased when it comes to the coal industry and when it comes to fossil fuels. So the infrastructure bill, in reference to improving the wealth of American people, that went to Joe Manchin. His wealth improved. His pocket got fatter. Everybody else is still struggling.
Bringing home manufacturing with semiconductors. We are bringing the fundamental technology to have the industries of the future with batteries and electric vehicles. Some of that is.
What is that? How does that help working class people? The average person, if you're making, let's say you're not making the $15 minimum wage, okay? It's different here in Massachusetts. Let's say you're making that $7.25 an hour, the federal minimum wage. Can you afford to buy an electric vehicle? These are the things that Ro Khanna, when he makes these praises and he says, this is what Joe Biden has done, this is what we should be thankful for. Who is he talking about? He's not talking to the working class. He's not talking to people that are poor. Hell, he didn't really talk to the middle class. I know people with middle class can't afford to buy an electric car. Have you seen the cost of electric vehicles? He's talking to people like him. He's talking to people that are like his Silicon Valley buddies. You got to remember where Ro Khanna's district is. So essentially, he's mentioning things that approve for the professional managerial class, not working class people. Let me let him finish here.
Industries of the future with batteries and electric vehicles. Some of that is going to take time, but we're beginning to see the results. And I think as those results become more evident to the American people, and as we talk about how consequential this president has been, his numbers will improve.
You can talk about it as much as you want, but people can look at their bank account. I mean, it's just, this has been an issue for far too long. The working class didn't start struggling under Joe Biden. It was a problem before, but it's gotten worse under Joe Biden. Why do you think he has a 36% approval on the economy? On the economy, mark my words, if Joe Biden loses in 2024, it is not going to be because of Cornel West, regardless of what like the mainstream media establishment figures will tell you. It's not going to be because of Donald Trump. It is going to be because of Joe Biden's policy positions on the economy. That is what is going to cause Joe Biden to lose. And honestly, oh well. So when you have people like Ro Khanna making excuses for Joe Biden, that actually does not help. But Ro Khanna is just looking out for his own political career. That's why he's saying what he's saying. If Ro Khanna was really trying to help Joe Biden, he would come out in this interview and he would be flat out honest and say, look, working class people are still broke. People still can't pay rent. Oh, and by the way, I live in California, and my state has the largest homeless population in the country. He would deliver those facts if he really wanted to put some type of pressure on Joe Biden. But they're not going to do that. People like him or Pramila Jayapal, they're not going to do that because they are political careerists. Ro Khanna is sitting back thinking about if he's going to run in 2028. It's all about enhancing their career. They're supposed to work for us because we're their constituents, but they're not out there fighting for us. They're fighting for their careers. Let's continue.
That's the case you make. But as we're sitting in August of 23, and that's the case that has been being made for months now and talking.
Look at her facial expressions. Watch this, guys. Listen to the way she says it. Like she don't buy this shit. Watch. Watch her facial expressions.
And that's the case that has been being made for months now and talking about Biden economics. Are you okay if that approval rating on the economy is still sitting at 37% heading into 24?
Did you guys see that? So I was surprised they actually said that on CNN, but of course he doesn't think it's going to stay that way. It can go up, it can go down, etc. But the point is, Joe Biden was supposed to be the better option. Remember? Joe Biden was supposed to heal the soul of the country. I'm seeing more homeless people out on the street. You seeing little mini skid rows pop up around your state? More people being evicted? I thought he was supposed to be the safer option. Remember, people? Isn't that what we were told? And here we are. And people want to tell you not to vote for a third party candidate, not to vote for an independent candidate, because that could cause Joe Biden to lose. No, these numbers will be the reason why Joe Biden loses. Because the economy is so bad. It is horrible. That will cause him to lose. Not Cornel West, not Dr. Shiva, not Marianne Williamson, not RFK Jr. It will be because of his handling of the economy. Mark my words.
Well, I don't think it will be come next November. But look, people were making this argument that the president's numbers were too low before the midterm, and everyone then was surprised that the Democrats did better. People were making arguments against this president back in 2020, including me when I was co-chairing the Bernie Sanders campaign. But Joe.
What he said in reference to the midterms doesn't make any sense because those are two different things. Listen to this.
Argument that the president's numbers were too low before the midterm, and everyone then was surprised that the Democrats did better. People were making arguments against.
Let's pause there for a second. Joe Biden was not running for re-election in 2022. The candidates that Ro Khanna is referring to, those were representatives that were running for House positions and they were running for Senate positions. So it's like you weren't voting for Joe Biden when you went to support those Democrat candidates. You were voting for those candidates. This is not the same thing. He's acting like, well, they criticized Joe Biden during the midterms, but they still showed up to vote for the Democrats. They showed up to vote for the candidates that represented their district. They didn't show up to vote for Joe Biden. These are two different things. And let's be real. You had two issues. The Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, and Joe Biden and the Democrats promised that they would codify Roe v. Wade into law. You get us those Senate seats, we'll codify Roe v. Wade into law. Right after the midterm says not happening. Promise the cancellation of student loan debt. Then right after, or a certain percentage, right after the midterm says, whoops, oopsie, federal judge struck that down. Oh, how convenient, when Joe Biden didn't follow instructions to begin with in the first place. They just use voters to keep them in office so that they can continue their political career. They don't actually plan to do these things. And Ro Khanna is no different.
this president back in 2020, including me when I was co-chairing the Bernie Sanders campaign, but Joe Biden won. So I think he's underestimated, and I believe when people go into the vote booth, they're going to know he's a decent human being, he's a patriot, he's trying his best, and he'll be reelected.
What is the whole they're a patriot thing? You know, it makes me feel kind of weird, you know, when people are like, well, he's a decent person and he's a patriot. Well, what does that really even mean? Like, so what? What are you talking about? He's a decent person. He co-wrote the crime bills, I should add. He said he didn't want his kids to grow up in a racial jungle. He's accused of sexual assault, which people like Ro Khanna don't want to mention, AOC don't want to mention, Bernie Sanders don't want to mention. It was all believe women until the women were accusing Democrat politicians. These are things we need to think about. People just say stuff now that don't even make any damn sense just to make someone sound good. He's a decent person and he's a patriot. What the hell that got to do with what he doing in office? What does that have to do with the economy? What does that have to do with all the promises that he made when he was running that he reneged on?
Real quick, CNN cameras exclusively caught up with President Biden on a bike ride this morning, asked him if he was going to be monitoring this arraignment today, and he, in passing, as he was passing by, he said no. But I'm curious how much you think you'd like to hear Joe Biden, when he's hitting the campaign trail, talking about this indictment against Donald Trump when he is campaigning and also still president, of course.
I don't think he should be. I think he should be focused on how he's going to continue to lower the price of eggs and milk. That's what I heard back in my district, how he's going to lower the cost of childcare, how he's going to continue to bring manufacturing back, and how he's going to try to heal this country. You know, one thing I think
Let me pause there for just a second. You want to know the real reason why he doesn't want Joe Biden to speak about the possibility of him running against Trump again or criticizing Donald Trump? Because they don't want Joe Biden to really speak much, period. They don't want Joe Biden to speak much because Joe Biden's having difficulty talking. The less he can speak, the better for them. Hide him for as much as you can, for as long as possible, because they know he's having difficulty with this. That's why they don't want to let him even debate. That's why he doesn't want to debate RFK Jr. or Marianne Williamson. Don't be surprised if it comes down to the general and you don't see debates for those either. And if that happens, if you think people were angry 2 years ago, think about how people will feel if that happens. But Ro Khanna has to defend him because Ro Khanna also wants to be president.
Childcare, how he's going to continue to bring manufacturing back, and how he's going to try to heal this country. You know, one thing I think the president probably regrets is that he really wants to unify this country. He wants to bring people together. That's what his inaugural was about. That's who he is as a person. And I think he knows that if he starts commenting on these things, that aspiration becomes harder. It's the hardest thing to do in American politics. I hope he'll continue to try to do it. I think that's what motivates him to run and to seek a second term.
Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you for coming on.
It's interesting. They continue to have these conversations with other politicians, but you don't see them having these conversations with Joe Biden. And again, it's because they don't want Joe Biden to speak because he's doing so horribly. Now, think about what you just heard about the economy from Ro Khanna. And now I want you to hear about the economy from Chris Hedges. And I'll let you decide who you think is telling the truth. This goes back to the Richard Wolff interview, today's class struggles with Chris Hedges. Listen to this.
Well, not only is it real, but let's say roughly 60% of American families are living paycheck to paycheck. They don't have $400 or $1,000. I don't remember the exact figure. I'm sure you do.
Pause right there. Already in. Pause. The fact that the average family is living paycheck to paycheck. It's just, and no, this is not a new issue. But the problem is it has increased. It is worse now. Ro Khanna doesn't say these things. He's asked about the economy. He doesn't even mention this. Let him continue.
An emergency. They are trapped in the instability of the gig economy. So there's not job protection. Even
the gig economy, the instability with the gig economy and no job protection. Now, why is that important in reference to Ro Khanna? Where does Ro Khanna live, right? Ro Khanna's in that Silicon Valley area, right? There's a lot of gig jobs there in the tech industry. How many people are working like in Silicon Valley, in San Jose, and that entire area that are part of that gig economy, which a lot of that came from the tech industry. And that has also increased, particularly after the pandemic. You see more companies now, like they don't really want to hire people permanently. You're not a permanent employee. They just want to hire you as a contract worker for 3 months. And then 3 months later, you get some other gig somewhere else. And then another gig and another gig. These positions, a lot of times, there's no health insurance that's offered to you. Don't even think about dental. Why doesn't Ro Khanna mention that? This idea of the gig economy, it comes heavily from his area. You got to go to Richard Wolff so that you can hear it from him and Chris Hedges. Let's continue.
Even if they have some kind of health insurance, it's the mercenary for-profit form of health insurance, which really doesn't cover catastrophic illnesses. And of course, if you get a catastrophic illness, you can't afford to pay your premiums, which means you lose it. That's why over 1 million people a year go bankrupt, even though they have insurance. So there is a deep distress rippling through the American population, and it's been rendered invisible by a corporate media that doesn't report it. I mean, look closely at the model, what the model for what goes as journalism now on CNN, MSNBC, any of these networks. It's just chatting about a few main headlines, and the shows will talk at exactly at the same kind of list of items will leap from show to show. Almost no reporting at all, and certainly no reporting of those that their advertisers and the corporate executives know will essentially create images or give voice to those the corporate state doesn't want to hold up. So,
and that's exactly why it's not common for you to watch networks like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and see images of the working class. That's not common. And even when they do talk about working class issues, they'll interview some expert who's not working class, doesn't know anyone that's working class, and they'll ask them, well, why are these workers on strike? Instead of talking to the workers, they're not interviewing the people who have been evicted from their homes. They're not interviewing the people who have all been laid off since the pandemic. They're talking to an expert who's had no experience in any of this. That's on purpose. They're advertisers, they're sponsors. They don't want you to constantly see those images about the working class, about people being homeless, people struggling to make it and to pay, to reach ends meet. If you saw that every day that you turned on, you would probably become very upset. And that would make you very angry at the corporate powers that be. And they can't have that on their hands. They would rather have you focus on red team, blue team, so that you can stay divided among your neighbors, fighting over an elephant and a donkey over a politician that you'll probably never, ever get to meet anyway. That is why you don't see those images oftentimes on CNN or MSNBC. Look at how they talked about the protest in France. Can't believe these people are protesting over a pension reform. I mean, gosh, all Macron did was just give them an extra 2 years in reference to their retirement. They protect the corporate class.
You've rendered invisible over half the population. You don't do any reporting anymore. It's completely partisan. The media has been siloed. One side, Fox News, of course, is cheerleading the Republican Party. On the other, CNN and MSNBC, and their credibility, I think it's even lower than Congress. So the media system in the United States, which has been seized by corporate power, and that's part of what the deregulation of the FCC under Bill Clinton achieved, is farce. It's burlesque. And I'm old enough to have started as a journalist in the 1980s in Central America and watched the very steep deterioration that's taken place with all of its flaws. I mean, I don't want to pretend those flaws weren't there, but the deterioration is so marked as to be really, I think it's fair to say, certainly on the airwaves, they don't do journalism anymore, at least the commercial outlets. And then you have these alternative nonprofit, Your Show and others that attempt to address serious issues but are marginalized. This is what the Twitter files expose, that the Homeland Security, the FBI, the State Department, the Pentagon were having weekly meetings with these social media platforms, as Matt Taibbi exposed when Elon Musk let him into the Twitter accounts. The back and forth, and all this stuff has disappeared. Critics from the left, critics from the right. And then I just one final point, and that is that when we talk about the Democratic Party, it is really now composed of the old establishment Republican Party. Liz Cheney, Crystal, all these figures have essentially been incorporated into the Democratic Party, and what they are opposing is Trump's white man's party. And I don't want to minimize the danger that a new Trump administration would visit, but both the media landscape and the political landscape is collapsed. You know more about Weimar than I do,
and they're both connected. So I want people to think about something for a second in reference to, what you're really getting in return. When they suppress these other outlets, the other independent media outlets, that's on purpose because they don't want you to hear an alternative point of view. They don't want you to hear another voice. Why do you guys think labor stories are usually heavily suppressed on these platforms? Think about it. All these strikes that have happened over the past 2 years, I've watched channels cover these strikes. Indie News Network covers strikes at least once a week. They cover labor. I've covered labor stories. And I'm here to tell you, if you're talking about labor, those stories are heavily suppressed on YouTube. Heavily suppressed. They don't really want you to focus on it. And in the end, it seems like a lot of times when they do talk about it on mainstream media, they find some way to poke the employees. Aren't you guys getting paid enough? You need more vacation time? But this is the way it's always been. I watched them do this through multiple strikes. The John Deere strike, the teacher strike. I mean, what teacher strike have they not done it to? There's been multiple ones. When the nurses in Worcester, Massachusetts went on strike, I watched it when they do it with the railroad workers tried to go on strike. I watched the way that they talk down about the railroad workers, and they talk down to the people as if they're not even people. Because the people who are shareholders of those networks, they don't really want the American people to wake up to a class consciousness, because then when you do wake up, you're not going to be mad at an elephant or a donkey. You're going to be mad at the billionaire. You're going to be mad at people that own companies like BlackRock. You're going to be mad at Larry Fink. And for some of you who decided that Elon Musk was this cool person, you're going to be mad at him too when you see where his wealth came from. They don't want you to pay attention to that. He goes on a little bit more here. I actually wanted to go to the next question. This question right here. There we go.
Understand the basis for the fact that literally for 30 to 40 years, the gap between rich and poor in this country has widened to a point that people back in the 50s and 60s really thought, and a large majority of them, could never happen again. Now it has happened. Why is it acceptable to the extent that it is? To some men,
it's not acceptable.
good.
It's just that the working class has been disempowered.
That's right. Bingo. It's not acceptable. They've taken so much power away from the working class. Now we have strength in numbers, but the problem is getting all those numbers on board. It's difficult to increase the numbers when people don't even want to talk to you or organize with you or unionize with you because of who you voted for. Hello. It's difficult to increase the number of people out in the streets for these protests when people don't even want to march with you because of who you voted for. This is why, like, the number of times I've covered these protests abroad, UK, France, Sri Lanka even, where they have millions of people out in the streets. They are bonded over a class consciousness that brings all of them out. We are not at that point in this country yet. And I say yet because I do believe that day is coming. We are bonded over red team, blue team, or we're bonded over social issues. And this is not to say you should not get into the streets over social issues and protests. But this is to say, where is that same type of momentum when it comes to the class issues, when it comes to you losing your job, where all these workers get laid off, them taking people off of unemployment, Joe Biden removing Medicaid from people, taking your health insurance away, taking your homes. You see, Occupy Wall Street actually had the right idea. They had the right idea because they realized, wait a minute, the top 1% is screwing all of us over. So the idea was correct. The problem is that message was then taken and it was funneled into a Bernie Sanders campaign into the Democratic Party. And that just took the momentum and the action that was on the street and it put it into a political party. That's a graveyard. You can't do that. Could you imagine? Imagine if Dr. King said, all right, guys, I know we're out here protesting and we've been working really hard, but there's this guy that's running for president and he's going to take this message and he's going to make it a part of his platform. And then the people, the activists on the outside just stop. No. They knew this would not work. Dr. King knew you can't do it through the political parties. Malcolm X knew that was not the way to go. Fred Hampton knew, hell to the no. Those people are going to take your message, they'll co-opt it, they'll water it down, and you won't win within the community. That's where Occupy went wrong. Letting Bernie Sanders take that message and put it through a political campaign in the Democratic Let me let Chris finish here.
So in the 50s, certainly in the early 50s, you had 34% plus of workers were organized into labor unions. And so there has been such a concerted, starting with the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act, but such a concerted effort to break the back of unions, to destroy unions. Now we have about 11%, and I think about 6%. You can correct me if I'm wrong, and these figures are public sector. And we saw with the railroad, the freight workers, they don't have the ability to strike. That was taken from them by Biden and the Congress under the
Railroad Workers Act. Now, remember, notice, did Khanna mention any of these things? Did Khanna, we're talking about the economy, Khanna mention anything about all the labor strikes that have happened in the past 2 years since Joe Biden has been president? Didn't even mention the railroad workers, what they went through. None of the stuff that you're hearing Chris Hedges discuss. There has been efforts over the past couple of decades to kill unionization. And this is why I tell you, unions is a great starting point, but your end game should be worker co-ops. And this is the reason why. Look how they try to crush it. Or the union management goes against what the members want. How many times have we seen this happen? You know, it's just, you can't. You got it. They're going to try every way that they can to crush you, right? When I interviewed the gentleman from New York, the Postal Workers Union, he said back in the 70s, they did wildcat strikes all the time. And I said, well, why doesn't this happen now? And he's like, people just don't feel empowered. It's harder for them to go on strike now. You know, you can't, the longer you wait, the harder it's going to become, because they'll just continue to implement laws and rules to make it more difficult for you to maintain any type of little power that you have as a worker. What happens if the Supreme Court makes a rule that you can't go on strike? What happens? And don't tell me it can't happen. It can happen. Well, what do you do? This is why I say those who are going on strike, you need to ask for everything that you can now.
Railroad Act. And you had the Democratic Party under Biden when they were running, positioning themselves as a kind of pro-labor party, and they would strengthen collective bargaining. And then when threatened with a strike, they took away the ability to collectively bargain among one of the few organized unions that had it. So people are angry, and it is being expressed in very dark ways, especially by the white working class, but they're not organized. And it is the destruction of unions that I think is at the core of both our political and economic malaise. And so you have an enraged population that has no ability to pit power against power, because the only ability that the workers have to pit power against power is the strike. And that is, in essence, been taken from them. I mean, strikes, they're in all, are virtually illegal in the United States.
There's one more part here. And then I do just want to say something really quickly. This is why Kshama Sawant was brave enough to step down from her political position, which she did not have to do, was brave enough to do that, step down from that and say, we need to build a working class coalition across this country. And that's why she started Workers Strike Back, because she's like, no, there needs to be some type of organization that can bring all of these unions together under one umbrella and really fight for some real concessions here. Let me let him finish here about, do you see some hope?
In the militancy, at least in a few areas, Amazon, Starbucks, do you see something shifting in the working class, in a sense, in response to what you've just said?
Well, certainly the aspirations are there. But remember, organizations, corporations like Amazon, Starbucks, Walmart's are really vicious in terms of breaking any kind of nascent unionized movement or union drive. And even when you establish a union, as they did in Long Island with Amazon, there's heavy pressure to destroy it. So yes, the aspirations are there, and that is where the hope is. That's why Kshama Sawant is not running for re-election on the city council in Seattle, but trying to build nationally a worker strike back movement. Because of course, the other problem is that the union leadership of the unions that exist, the old AFL-CIO, et cetera, have really been bought off with lavish salaries. They're just kind of junior partners in a capitalist system. So many of these strikes really have to become wildcat strikes, where they defy the union leadership. I think it was 2018, the West Virginia teachers strike, where the union leadership didn't want to strike and the teachers struck on their own. But we're almost beginning from zero. And so, yes, there's certainly hope, but we can't be naive about all of the forces, both governmental, but also corporate, that will attempt to break the back of this movement. And we are a product of probably the bloodiest labor wars in the industrialized world. Hundreds of American workers were killed. Tens of thousands were blacklisted. And these people will play dirty, and they'll play hard to break the back, because they have essentially succeeded in domesticating the working class, and they want to keep it that way, especially with the gig economy. Even I just was part of the strike at Rutgers, because I teach as an adjunct in the prison system. There you have people with PhDs earning $28,000 a year without benefits. And they can't even afford rent. I mean, some of them are sleeping on couches or friends. The highest paid state official in New Jersey is the Rutgers football coach at $4 million a year. I mean, just insane. So you have a corporate kind of model. I mean, even professors now have been plunged into the temp or gig economy with no benefits and no job security. So we have a steep hill to climb. But yes, I find hope in that there is an understanding among the working class that this is the only way out, both economically and politically.
All right. So you see a very stark contrast there between what Ro Khanna's response was about the economy and what Chris Hedges' response was about the economy. Right? How can you talk about the economy and not even have some type of mention about labor, about the people all these different people on strike? How can you not even bring that up, Ro Khanna? As if Americans are deaf and blind. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. It's a hot mess, man. It is a hot mess. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Too much talk about economy, not enough talk about income inequality. Even when economy is good, income inequality persists. Reason, if we measure working economy by purchasing power, giving the illusion that people got money when in fact they don't have borrowed money, aka credit cards, because paychecks are underwater, division within the Labor Department to measure income inequality is needed to make part of the convo. Interesting points there, Roger, as well. Let me go to the super chats and we're going to get to our Dr. Shiva story, which I think is really interesting. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Aberdeen71. Get to the gone. Okay. Hedges made me look at things completely different. His writing and input is second to none. I hear you. Ravina says, I was on track to retire at 65. Then in 2008 happened. I lost 100% of my 401k that I've been paying into for 20 years at that point. I know people that had to dip into their 401k to pay their rent. Delthea says, NPR has a show called Marketplace, Not Labor Place. Think about it. It's a good point. And JB says people are also exhausted by imagination because they're overworked and suppressed from a time perspective. Many don't have the bandwidth to even look deeper into class issues. That's a good point. They keep you working so you don't have time to organize.